How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jason, and in today's video, I wanted to take a look at the Edmonton Elks' long 20-game home losing streak that has now tied the North American professional sports record for the longest home losing streak. Let's talk about how it started, when it may end, looking at their upcoming schedule and all the other losses in between, talking about how it happened for this organization and how it's fallen this far. So you have to go all the way back to October 12th of 2019 versus the BC Lions when they won 19-6. That was their last home victory for the Edmonton football franchise when they were still named the Edmonton Eskimos. So, I mean, that alone shows you how long it's been for this franchise. And, nobody would have had any idea at the time this team was going to, have this much of a demise over these past couple of years. So the first loss of this streak is in week 20 of 2019, the last home game they had that year. They lose 27-24 versus the Saskatchewan Roughriders. And I remember Cody Fajardo having a big comeback in that one. But ultimately, I thought that Edmonton was still a very good team at that point of the season. They ultimately actually end up winning a playoff game that year against the Montreal Alouettes before losing in the East Final to Hamilton. But the Elks were really respectable that year. The Eskimos back then were very respectable that season still. And going into the 2021 season, I was a person that was very high on the Elks. People that watched my channel back then remember that I took the Elks to actually win the Grey Cup in my preseason predictions that year. And that really blew up in my face because you look right away, first couple weeks of the season, just an absolute disaster for this team. Week 1, they lose 16-12 versus the Ottawa Red Blacks in a game that was just really, really tough to watch. I remember that Ottawa only won with less than 100 total yards of offense. The one key play was Abdul Kenna with a big pick six off of the hands of, I think it was Shai Ross that tipped that ball for Edmonton, and it went back the other way, and ultimately that was the deciding factor in that game. So already bad vibes about this season already in week 1. Week 2, they lose in a more convincing way, 30-13 versus the Montreal Alouettes. And I remember this was just a theme that was starting to pop up, that they really weren't defending their home field versus these East Division opponents, which is usually a thing that we have seen these West Division teams do constantly for years, defend their home turf versus East opponents. It's usually been a very tough thing for East teams to do, go out West and win, but it hasn't been the case over the last couple of years in Edmonton. Week 6, they lose 32-16 at home against Calgary. I mean, this was off the big Labor Day win that they had the week before. I remember Trevor Harris played amazing in that Labor Day win at Calgary, but the next week, Calgary took it back, won 32-16. Week 7, the next week, they lose 37-22 against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And I believe that is the start of the Taylor Cornelius era for the Edmonton Elks. This is when Trevor Harris has some kind of weird injury, or they wanted to bench him. He wasn't really playing that well other than that Labor Day game that year. So they ultimately go with Cornelius, and the results do not get better for this organization. Week 11, they lose to Winnipeg again at home, 26-16 in a much closer game, but ultimately a trend you're starting to see with this team already this season. They, just cannot score at home. 12 points, 13 points, 16 points, 22 points, a little bit better there, but 16 points in that second matchup with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers at home, and they just could not get anything going offensively during this season. I remember it was just such a struggle for this organization. Trevor Harris, I believe, was traded by this point to the Montreal Alouettes, so Cornelius was running the show for the Elks. Then week 13, they lose convincingly to Hamilton, 39-23. I remember this was the Don Jackson game for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. I think that was the only 100-yard rushing game that he had as a Ticat, but against that terrible Edmonton Elks run defense that is still an issue here in 2023. Jackson had an amazing game for the Ticats in that one, and ultimately extended that losing streak for the Elks. And then the last home game of the 2021 season, the Elks lose 19-17 in a very close game against the Saskatchewan Roughriders. And I will say that Saskatchewan is the team that Edmonton has gotten the closest to beating over this time period, but ultimately just cannot, close it out when it's mattered the most. Then you go over to the 2022 season. So 2021 season only played the 7 home games, shortened 14-game schedule. But now 2022, we're going to a full 18-game schedule. Let's see if they get a home win here. Week 2 of that year, Saskatchewan, they beat them again, 26-16. another similar score to what they lost to Winnipeg here in 2021. But again, a pretty close score with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. But I remember Nick Arbuckle was the starting quarterback at this time. He really didn't inspire any confidence. And I believe Taylor Cornelius was actually the fourth string quarterback by this point of the season, and ultimately ended up being their starter by the end of the season. Such a bizarre quarterback situation that has been the last few years here in Edmonton. Then week 5, they lose 49-6 at home against the Stampeders. The Stampeders have really had the Elks number over the past couple of years when you look back at it. Other than that Labor Day game in 2021, the Stamps have really taken it to the Elks. And then week 7, they lose 24-10 against Winnipeg. And it's very interesting. They've actually played Winnipeg pretty close in those matchups, but ultimately have not been able to come out on top in those matchups either. Week 10, they lose to the Saskatchewan Roughriders 34-23. I remember I was watching this with a buddy. I remember really cheering for the Elks to win one, and I think that right before the half, they took the lead, and I was like, all right, the Elks may actually get one together here and win this game. But the next play, I remember Saskatchewan returned it for a touchdown, and I don't think they ever relinquished the lead after that point in the game. So another close loss to Saskatchewan there. And then week 12, they lose 25-18 versus the Ottawa Redblacks as well. And this is the point of the season that they traded Nick Arbuckle to the Ottawa Redblacks, and he ultimately ends up starting against them. And the Redblacks ultimately win 25-18, and Arbuckle gets to continue that streak against his former team. And then week 14, they lose 56-28 at home versus the Calgary Stampeders. So between those two home losses to the Stampeders that year, 56 points in week 14 and 49 points in week 5. I mean, just over 100 points given up by that defense. Just a really disappointing effort on defense in that first year under Chris Jones, and it hasn't gotten a lot better since. Spoiler alert. And then week 17, they lose 25-18 against Montreal. This was another close call. They had a lot of close turnovers right near the red zone, and that really swung that game. I think it was a Darius Pickett that had a long pick 6 in that one right near the goal line. So the key mistakes at the worst possible times. It's not that this team is playing awful football in all 20 of these losses. It's that they cannot get those key plays when it matters the most. And, that was one example of it. And then week 19, to complete the winless season at home, the second consecutive winless season at home, they blow a fourth quarter lead to the Toronto Argonauts. I believe it was around a 10-point lead with around 5 minutes left, something like that. I remember it was just a really ridiculous comeback by the Argos. They win 28-23 in that matchup. Of course, Toronto ends up winning the Grey Cup last year, but they look shaky in some of those games late last season, and ultimately, the Elks could have won that game, and it looked like they were the better team for most of that game, and they just could not close the Argos out. So they go 0-9 during the 2022 season at home, 0-7 during the 2021 season at home. And then when you look at 2023, there was a lot of optimism going into this season. I think that when you looked at the offseason additions they brought in, especially in the receiving core, Eugene Lewis, Steven Dunbar, a couple of guys on defense like Luchez Purifoy and AC Leonard, I thought that they had some pieces here that could potentially get them back into that playoff conversation. But man, I was way off. Starting with week 1 of the 2023 season, against Saskatchewan, again, they lose 17-13. Another close call against the Rough Riders. And this one was probably the closest call of all. They had an opportunity to take the lead with a few minutes left in the game in the fourth quarter on the 1-yard line of the Saskatchewan Roughriders after a turnover by Trevor Harris. They have 3 cracks at it from the 1-yard line, and ultimately they do not get in on any of those 3 attempts, and Saskatchewan is able to hold on for a 17-13 victory. And just an absolute heartbreaking, feeling for the Elks. I thought that if they could get that win and break that streak week 1 of this season, it would have made a massive difference for the morale of this organization. But they let it, linger for another week, and we see the results in week 3. They lose in blowout fashion to the Toronto Argonauts, 43-31. That's a very misleading score. I think it flatters the Elks. I thought the Argos really blew them out in that one, but Jared Daggy comes off the bench and throws a couple of garbage time touchdowns to make it look closer. And a similar story happens in week 6, the most recent home loss for the Elks that tied the North American professional sports record for longest losing streak, 37-29 versus the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Again, the Ticats had a multiple score lead entering the fourth quarter. They kind of led off, played a lot of prevent defense, and Jared Daggy, again coming off in the bench in relief for Taylor Cornelius, comes off the bench and finds a way to get a couple of garbage time touchdowns while the clock is ticking down. So ultimately, the last couple weeks have been very ugly for the Elks. It doesn't look like they've been anywhere close to the effort that they need in order to break this losing streak. And I mean, when you look ahead, this is their remaining home games. Week 8 is their next home game against the BC Lions. Don't see them winning that one. Week 10 against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Again, don't see them winning that one. Week 12 is interesting. They play the Ottawa Red Blacks. Again, they lost against Ottawa last year when they had Nick Arbuckle starting at quarterback, so I wouldn't guarantee a win there either for the Elks at home. And then week 14, they play Calgary. Again, Calgary's had their number over the past couple of years here. Week 16, they play BC again. With the way they're rolling, who knows at this point of the season, maybe the Elks catch them there. And then the final home game of the season is against the Montreal Alouettes. So we'll see if where that team is at that point of the season. But, I mean, honestly, it's hard to find a win still when you look at this home schedule for the Elks and just how bad they've been this season. Already 0-6 on the year. Couldn't have imagined that they would have started this bad again. I had them pegged for around 8 wins this year, but ultimately they just haven't had the progression needed at key positions on this football team, mainly the quarterback position. And it's obvious that Trevor Harris, who they kind of threw under the bus during the 2021 season, granted he was not playing well, but they threw him under the bus, traded him to Montreal. He ends up playing pretty well the last couple of years before his unfortunate injury this past weekend as the recording of this video. But I mean, it clearly wasn't his fault in Edmonton, and you've seen how their quarterback play has been since. It's been a complete disaster with Taylor Cornelius, Nick Arbuckle, all these other guys they've sprinkled in there, now Jared Daggy. It just hasn't been a pretty picture for the Elks, and I really don't know when this streak is going to end. I just hope it does soon for the sake of those fans over there in Edmonton. And, it's just unfortunate. This used to be really one of the staple franchises of the CFL, really one of the leading franchises in terms of attendance year over year, but unfortunately just the losing culture over the past couple of seasons, it's just been kind of a curse over this franchise. And again, I really hope it ends soon for this franchise and the sake of those fans there. And I just wanted to make a video dedicated to this today because I think that it's really a historic streak, really, when you look at the context of sports. And I think that it was worthy of paying attention to and seeing really how it all fell apart for the Elks. But with that said, that is going to be the end of today's video, and I want to thank each and every one of you for watching. Be sure to let me know your thoughts on the Edmonton Elks and their long losing streak down below in the comments section. And with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.